All right. So there are some sessions I do that are very PowerPoint centric. They're very PowerPoint heavy, and so there's a lot of theory to cover before we actually go in and delve into the product. This is not one of them, which means you'll be seeing Dynamics NAV for almost the entire presentation. This is my only slide besides a Q&A type of slide where I have my email address for everybody's convenience. Our objectives today. I want to make sure that somebody who's attending this session has a good idea of what we're going to cover. So if you're not the right fit for these topics, you could either invite somebody from your team to sit in or just kind of sit in and learn a little bit more. Also, recordings of this presentation are going to be made available. So if you're an Interdyne BMI client, send an email to the email address that I'll show at the end of this presentation, mine or our marketing team's email address, and we'll make sure we get you a copy of the recording so you can use that for reference. We're going to talk about a few things around role tailoring. When we talk about role tailoring, charts, KPIs, etc., we generally want to break it down into a few things. Charts and Dynamics NAV is one place to start. So with charts and Dynamics NAV, different versions have different types of charts available. It's been fairly consistent since NAV 2013 onwards, but for people using NAV 2009, they only had a smaller selection of chart types available to work with. We'll talk about the menu suites in Dynamics NAV and the department concept and how that could be used to quickly make menus available, search items available, etc. So we'll cover that in a little bit of detail as well. Make sure that you are able to then take things that you want, create them into menu groups, make sure that people are able to search for those in Dynamics NAV. I'm also going to help you understand the difference between personalizing Dynamics NAV, which is something you can do for yourself, and if you've been using NAV for some time, you've probably figured out exactly how that happens. Now I'll talk a little bit about how you can configure Dynamics NAV and how that differs from personalization. We'll talk about the ability to configure or personalize menus, ribbon items or action items, as well as reports. I'll work my way from there into modifying existing role centers. So the role centers that you may be working within, how you can modify them so everybody using Dynamics NAV in that role center can benefit from the changes. We'll also talk about how you can add some components to the role center. Really, this is where the topics can start becoming more complicated, and in sessions that go 2 to 3 hours, I usually cover them in greater detail because it requires a little more use of the development environment. It doesn't require writing code, but just requires a better understanding of the structure, the table structures, the page constructs, etc. in Dynamics NAV. And then finally, we'll work a little bit around how we can modify and work with activity queues, those blue tiles or stacks of paper that you see in your versions of Dynamics NAV, and the enhanced queues, which are the green, red, or yellow bars that you might see on top of some of these activity queues if you're using NAV 2015 or 16. So as promised, that's the extent of PowerPoint. Let's jump into the product. So let me escape. I am logged into Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2016. Now, my environment here for the purpose of today's presentation is a local deployment. But everything that I'm showing here can also be done on a Microsoft Azure deployment, provided for some of these things you have administrative access and you're able to remote desktop connect to the server. Some things that I show you are not going to require access to the server. You might be able to do it from the client side, but there will be things that I think server access will be necessary. Now, you may already know some basics, but let's cover some ground with basics and then work our way upwards. So you will have heard from your project manager, your consultant, or if you've spoken to me before, you're probably familiar with Role Center and profiles, and you might have kind of heard them being used in an interchangeable manner. So let's talk a little bit about that. What's a profile, what's a role center, and what's going on here. When you use Dynamics NAV, Dynamics NAV comes with about 25 or 26 different profiles. So essentially a profile is going to be a version of Dynamics NAV that is tailored to a specific person's job description or a specific department's work. If you are somebody in the accounts payable department, you're going to find the AP coordinator role center our profile is great to work with. Now, just like that, we have 2 or 3 others in accounting. We have something for order processor for people who are primarily in the sales order processing or customer service department. Our C-level executives are probably living and breathing in the president role center, etc., or profile. So this is something I sometimes slip up myself, even though I've been using Dynamics NAV very long. I do sometimes interchangeably use the word profile and role center. However, there's a small difference. A profile is all the collective changes to a Dynamics NAV environment that allow a president, for example, to experience Dynamics NAV differently. It could mean what they see on their home screen. So when I go back to my home screen, it could mean what they see here. This particular presentation is also known as their role center, so the main home screen that they're greeted, where they see charts and parts and other types of components. It could also mean the things that are pinned by default to their ribbons, other menu items that are shown over here, so the navigation menus they see, other navigation menu groups that they might see, and we can also have changes unique to the way the columns are shown. So two people might look at contacts in Dynamics NAV, and if they are assigned to different profiles in Dynamics NAV, by default, one might see number, name, phone number, salesperson, territory, and search name, and another profile might actually not show the salesperson code, or the order in which these columns are displayed may be entirely different. Or as I'm looking through contact cards or customer cards, fields may be organized differently. So that is a good distinction to understand between profiles and role centers. Role centers simply represent what you see on the screen of a profile. So when somebody logs in to the president profile, what they see when they first log in is a role center. Everything else that follows in terms of unique features and functionality for that person or that group will be called a profile. When you first use Dynamics NAV, you may not even have chosen a specific profile. You may automatically have been logged in as president, or depending on what the default was in your organization, you may have logged in as an accounting manager, an order processor, or somebody else. So let's maybe start off first by just, again, another basic topic. How do you change, or how do you first identify what profile you're assigned to? And if your administrator gives you the permissions, how can you change to a different profile? Right now, I've got two things going on. I've got a president profile loaded up with its role center, and I've also just fired up a sales order processor profile. I'm the same user, but I'm logged in as both. So I'll also talk to you about how you can do it to where if you're an administrator, how you can log into different profiles all at once. The place you want to start off first by is going to the profiles page again. Now, as you're typing this, if you were to just type the word profile, know that Dynamics NAV also has a menu called profile, which is completely unrelated to this conversation. It's more of a screen and menu related to the customer relationship management in Dynamics NAV. What we want to focus is on the word profiles with the S. When you look at this list, you're going to see one of these, and only one of these, marked with a checkbox in the default role center column. When you create a brand new user in Dynamics NAV, if you do not assign a profile to them, they will automatically log in as an order processor. Now, another side reminder too is security management in Dynamics NAV. That is not a matter of focus for our conversation today, but in a quick 15-second or 30-second elevator speech. Profiles, role tailoring, etc. are complements to the security model in Dynamics NAV. They are not a replacement for security. Security in Dynamics NAV allows me to set who can view certain screens, who can run a report, who can execute a code, a unit of code, etc. Profiles and personalizations and role centers, all of these things simply allow me to organize the way that information is presented, and sometimes simply the act of not making that information available on the screens by hiding or not making part of the menu set can be sufficient, or can be a light way of enforcing security. However, when you absolutely must limit people from access to your GL accounts, from access to personal information or payroll data, that can be done by way of security. Now, back here to our topic at hand. Order processors are going to be, the order processor is going to be the default profile. Now, side note too, again here, as you are an administrator, or if you're an administrator, you can make a decision that you're going to disable personalization for one or more profiles. What does this mean? If you've been using Dynamics NAV for any length of time, you know that you can right-click one of the things in the ribbon, right-click a column header, right-click something on the navigation menu, or edit or customize a page and make some changes. You can add or remove items from a ribbon, or similarly, you can add or remove fields or columns or reorganize them on a page. If you mark a particular profile as being disabled for personalization, users assigned to this profile are not going to be able to make any changes whatsoever. Now, what you want to do is, if you are going to enforce a rule like this, is you want to then use Dynamics NAV security to ensure that somebody else can't simply come to the screen and remove this check mark. So once you start going to certain, if you start adding a little more detail, you want to make sure at that point that you're creating some security, putting that in place. And Dynamics NAV does have some nice permission sets to get started with. They're not perfect for every business type. They may not cover specifically what you're looking to do, but it's a good starting place. And then you can build upon the security models. Also, when you're working with profiles, you have the ability to assign OneNote integration. So there are two types of integration with OneNote. One is called a record notes. The other is called a page notes. What this means is, with record notes, if I am working on a customer page, I can open a customer record. I can click on the OneNote icon. It will pop up OneNote on the side. And then I can take notes specific to the customer record that I've opened up or I've highlighted on the list page. Page notebooks allow me to take notes pertaining to all customers. So if I'm on the customer's list, any note that I add will be applicable to all my customers. So it's just going to be a global type of reference. Some customers use it, and some customers will use record notebooks, but very few use the page notebook. I think more of our younger clients are finding OneNote integration useful. It's probably one of those things that's been instilled from the years in college. So now we've seen about the default profile. If you do want to change it, you can go to Edit, and a card will open up. You first need to disable the existing profile as the default role center. You can select another one and mark this as the default role center. At any point in time, again, I remind you that you can only have one default role center. Now, above and beyond that, different users can be assigned specific profiles. You can do that from a screen called User Personalization. User Personalization allows us to select users. Not every user in the system will be appearing here. It's only the ones who you've created special user personalization records for. What I mean by that is, if I have 20 users, 19 of them may all go to my order processor role center, which was my default profile. But the one user that I want to have log in as president, I would go and create or manage this user personalization record. So over here, I've got a user ID, profile ID assigned from my drop-down list of profiles. You don't have to specify a language ID if you're primarily using English, and if your system's language ID or locale is already set to English US, but it's your prerogative if you do or not. Finally, if you have multiple companies in the database, Dynamics NAV will likely try to get the new user logged in to the first company that appears in the alphabetical organized list. So if you have a company starting with A, a company with D, and a company with X, it will first log in the person the first time with the company with A, unless you tell it otherwise. So you can come over here and say, my company that I want this user to log into by default is, and specify that. Now there's some other things like my time zone for the user. I can also specify that. That allows the system to understand the time zone that I work in, and some of the actions and my integrations will then take that into consideration. Simple enough. Now, if I want to experience Dynamics NAV instead of as a president by default, which is how I'm logged in, if I wanted to experience that as an order processor, one way I could do that would be by coming to the screen and changing my profile ID, and then moving on with it. If I'm trying to add another user who previously did not have a user personalization created, I would first come here. I can fully expect to see an error. That's just kind of a little bit odd how they came up, made this page. I'd click on the Assist Edit. It'll show me my full list of NAV users. I'll select my other user and then assign her the requisite detail that I'm interested in. So at the very least, I can say she logs into Cronus America, for example. All right. So going back into, now having covered these basics, let's go back to our objectives. I promised that I would first start off by talking about how to create different types of charts in Dynamics NAV. So in Dynamics NAV, there are 3 different types of charts. The first type of chart is the one that runs off of account schedules, and these are called our finance performance charts. So before you can work with them, you must have some account schedules created. If you're a business that is primarily doing your financials using JetExpress or using another tool, then you will want to create some account schedules so that they can be used in reports. Now you could use your traditional account schedule, which might have a lot of columns and a lot of rows. So here I have all these multiple rows, and I have my period to date, my year to date comparison type of setup for column layout. I could also make life easier for myself and create more abbreviated account schedules. So this could be if you want to have very specific types of information available. I've got examples of both in the type of charts that I've created. Once you have made these account schedules, on the role center, certain profile role centers will have the ability to show finance performance by default. Usually they are the president, the accounting manager, and I think the bookkeeper ones. If it doesn't exist on those, when I get to the part on how I can modify role centers, I'll talk about how you can add the finance performance component if it doesn't appear. The first thing you want to do if you don't see it, and you do want to see if it's even available to you, is you can go to Customize, click on the menu, Customize this page. What I'm doing here is a personalization, and a couple of different points in our conversation I'll keep reiterating that, which means the change I make here only impacts me and nobody else. Here is my current layout, my finance performance chart, my items list, my outstanding receivables chart, and then on the right-hand side, the other 4 components that are here. I can add and remove things. If I don't see a finance performance chart, I can click here and add one. If I already see it, I can add another finance performance chart. So I actually have the ability to have the finance performance chart displayed twice. Why would I want to do that? Because each finance performance chart group is a Rolodex of charts in its own right. So if I have 2 or 3 finance performance charts, maybe I want one to show the income and expense chart and another finance performance chart by default to show another window or another report. So I can do that. Now, also know in Dynamics NAV, this will also be something I talk about a few different times, is if you ever mess up as you're creating or personalizing your environment, you can always hit restore defaults over here. I'll also talk about, when I get to the configuration part, how you can completely reset all the changes that you've made, how you can do a complete global restore defaults, if you will. So let's cancel it. I've already got my finance performance chart here. When you first load it up, chances are it's not going to have anything. It's just going to be a big blank box. So what you're going to do is going to go to Select Chart. When you go to Select Chart, you will see here I have some demonstration charts. At the end of this, for my attendees, I can also send a link to a less than 3-minute YouTube video that I've created, or I think less than 4-minute YouTube video on how I created a chart from scratch without anything in my without anything on this chart pane. I did have some account schedules to work with though. But I will kind of go through a couple, and I'll make some changes here, and then I'll show you where you can watch how to make one from scratch. So let's start off with an income and expense. Let's edit this. And what we do over here, we'd give our a description for the chart. That will show up when somebody's looking at the chart and wants to know exactly what this will be showing. I think when I go back to the chart, I'll drill down, you'll see there's an information icon. Just a quick way for somebody to understand what this chart is all about. You're going to select the account schedule name, and you're going to select the column layout name from the account schedule. You'll tell the system what you want to base your x-axis on. Typically, in these environments where you're creating a financial performance dashboard, the most sensible way to do it, or the most practical way to do it, is to have my periods as my row, because you want it to trend from left to right from one period to another. Now, you might want to set a starting date, the number of months that it shows, and how long each, the the number of months to show would be down here. And if you want it to be days or weeks or something instead of months, then you can select that over here as a period length. Now, in my chart, in my account schedule, I may have had many columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my edit functionality or delete functionality to remove the ones I don't need. Then I can also add more. So if I want to edit this, it's going to open another window. And here are the 3 columns or the 3 measures that I have shown up over here. Total revenue show up as a column. Total expenditure showing up as a stack column. So even if any one of these 2 is marked as a stack column, all the other columns will automatically stack. And then my EBITDA, or just my earnings before interest in this case, as a line. I can have up to 6 measures showing up here. The system will not let me have more than 6 measures as my rows, or as the columns that it's going to show, excuse me. All right. Now, once I've done that selection, if it's possible or applicable, you might also see another measure or another axis determination. So measure x-axis, and you might be able to edit that. In this particular chart, it doesn't make sense, so it doesn't show that. Let's go back to another chart that I have over here. So a cash flow chart. When I do that, I'll click a refresh. Now here I'm seeing a different account schedule being referred to. I'm also seeing some more information over here. Let's edit this, and you'll see chart types as column, 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 and line. And then over here, I see very specific references to which account schedule line number I'm looking for or what column layout reference I'm looking at. Now, once you come back over here and you've run these charts for account schedule for finance performance, I can use this next and previous to kind of flip through this Rolodex of charts. What's nice about the finance performance charts is anything that I create, I can click and drill down into. So if I select a period and click on it, it's automatically going to open my account schedule window filtered on that particular period with the default column layout for this report. I can then filter further. I can refresh, change my my trendscape and so on, and do what I need to do. If you're looking to make one from scratch, and I promised that I will send you some information, all the same, let me just kind of quickly bring this up on our screen. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with letstalknav.com. It is our Interdyne BMI Dynamics NAV tips and tricks blog. We post a lot of information on this. Sometimes we post multiple posts a month, but the last month or so I've been a little bit busy, so we haven't gotten around to posting much. Actually, the very last one that I posted was exactly on how to create finance performance charts. So there is a quick walkthrough, and there is a video that you can watch, and this video will give you all that you need to know to create charts from scratch. So let's talk NAV and the very first article called How to Create a Finance Performance Chart in Less than 5 minutes. Now let's move on from finance performance to a few other types of charts. Cash flow forecast charts. These, again, like finance performance charts, come from a very specific module within Dynamics NAV. If you're using cash flow forecasting in Dynamics NAV, and our purpose today isn't to create a cash flow forecast, so I'm not going to show you how to create one, but if you're using one, you have to have a record. You'll have all of your filters and everything set, but you also make sure that it has a show in chart on roll center checked. Again, only one cash flow forecast record can be marked with this field, with this checkbox. If you have a cash flow forecast created, that is the one that's checked will then show its data over here. Much like a finance performance chart, color-coded, I can see, for example, as I look at a value, when I hover over it, how much sales orders, which are purple, how much they are, so about 2.15 million. And then when I click on it, it's actually going to drill down on my cash flow forecast entries for sales orders. I know not everybody's using cash flow, so I'll move on from there. Another type of, the first two I think are very similar, finance performance, cash flow. They pull from a specific module in NAV. The second type of chart is a sales or purchase or inventory performance chart. These use something called sales analysis views or purchase analysis views. You have to have sales analysis reports and purchase analysis reports, etc. created first. Again, For anybody interested in this, we can do some training on this as well. This is also about a 2 to 3 hour type of training topic. What would you use it for? If you want to create some ad hoc reports or analysis, let's say I want to do something around a certain type of product sale. Now, before I do it, I've already got setups like I've created a layout. What do I want to see as rows? So I've created some categories manually. I've grouped items that I want to see in each of these categories and a formula maybe for a total. And then I've told the system how I want my columns to present data. So in one column I want to see sales shipped not invoiced, another I want to see sales invoice, sales quantity, sales total, etc. And here you can quickly check, all right, this is an invoiced column where we're going to see the net change for the item entries, and if there's anything else that I want to show, what are we going to show, sales amount or quantity or cost amount, etc. So there are lots of choices. So this isn't a very complex module. It just takes a little bit of understanding of the possibilities with the toolbox, because there are no sales analysis reports that will already be there in your company. But once you have some of these, you can then go to the sales performance chart. Again, if this can be a Rolodex, you can cycle through multiple this isn't a Rolodex, you can go from previous period to next period. When I go to select chart, here's where I'll tell the system exactly which analysis item report I want to see, what to base the x-axis on, period length, start date, the number of periods, the line in the column template, and then which measures from that analysis I'm going to show in my chart. And then it will show me this information on my dashboard. The final item, this has been around the longest, since NAV 2009. When you are looking to create custom charts off of lists, so these are completely abstract. These are also known as generic charts in the newer versions of NAV. So how are these different? A, they're not coming from a specific module. This chart could come from a vendor screen, could come from my customers list, my items list, my sales orders list. There's really no specific place that I can, that I could or could not create it from. I can also create these from queries. So if you're a developer who creates query objects in Dynamics NAV, queries that look a lot like views basically that you might script in SQL. So if you're doing those, then you might be able to use those to create charts. One differentiating aspect between our generic charts and the other ones is that these are the charts I can click and drill down on, and it would open a window that lets me see some information. So whether it's sales performance or cash flow or finance performance charts, I click and I get a drill down. My generic charts, I would be able to interact with them. If it's a three-dimensional chart, I can kind of move it around, but I will not be able to get anything when I click. When I hover on it, it will show me some information about that measure. So here, for example, outstanding receivables, I see this for domestic customers with payment terms 1 month, 8 days. Now when I click on it, nothing happens, but when I hover, it will show me the balance due as a value. With all of the types of charts that I create, I have the ability to kind of put in these descriptions. So I showed you description for finance performance where you can enter. Similarly, I can have a description for these charts. So somebody looking at this will see these are outstanding receivables by customer, posting group, and payment terms. Great. Similarly, if I want to see this chart, I could say shows a company's trends in income over expenses, etc., etc. So users won't be left to kind of figure out by themselves what this chart represents. Some charts are more meaningful than others. So how do you make these generic charts? I'll actually show you an example of that today. So let's go to a list of our customers. We'll create this same type of chart. Now, you may already know some of these things, but let's go over them again. Dynamics NAV allows you to create what are called saved views or filtered views in the system. What is that? If I want to create a page view with multiple filters, so one or more filters, I'd be able to do that and then save it for further use. Now, if you're not familiar with the filter pane, you've at least seen this pane. If I want to filter in something, I come to the customers list page. I want to look for any customer called a Canon Group, type that in, it finds it. Good or the bad is, good is it's easily accessible. The bad is I can't do much with this filter. I also cannot add other filters to it. So if I have multiple filters, what I can do is expand this Now here I can say find all of my customers that have a balance greater than 5,000, right? And then if I have another filter, I can also say find within these customers the ones that I fulfill orders to from my green warehouse location. Perfect. Now I've got these. Now I can save this. I'm not required to, but a good idea is to save this in case I want to come back and make some changes to the chart, or if I want to be able to quickly reference this. When I saved it, I'll call customers green balance. It did ask me, I forgot to stop and show you that, it asked me which menu to put it in. It won't show me directly departments, but it'll show me which menu, and I selected home. Well, home was by default. When I do it, it's going to refresh my Dynamics NAV instance, and when it comes right back up, because I have a customer menu on my home screen, it will neatly tuck this underneath my customers list. From here, I can then go to show as chart, and now I'm going to be able to create my measures. Because I previously used a balance due versus name, it will kind of remember that. But perhaps I want to show, instead of balance or name, I want to see either by salesperson. So a measure that we didn't use at all during our filtering. So I can scroll down over here. I can also use my alphabet, so S until, keep hitting S until I get to salesperson code. These are all from one salesperson. Maybe name was a good way for now. Yeah. All right. In some cases, you may also have multiple measures. So you do have the ability to say, show me more than one measure side by side. So I have balance in dollars, balance due in dollars, excuse me. I might also want to see how many number of orders, maybe something abstract. So I see this customer has 4 orders, this customer has 2 orders, etc. If I want to see a third dimension, like that 3D chart I have on my home screen, I'd add that. Let me go ahead and clear this secondary measure because that limits the number of charts I can work with. If I want to change this layout for the chart, I'd be able to customize. I right-clicked and I clicked on customize, and that's going to bring up the screen that allows me to do a few other things and then save it to use on a home screen. So first I can tell the system, what do I want to see? Am I looking for sum? Am I looking for count? How am I aggregating these on my chart? What do I want to see it as? Columns? Area? If I want to see generally what a preview would look like, this isn't an accurate reflection of your data, but just a preview of what that graph type appears like. Range, radar, funnel. You can create different types of presentation models. You can give your descriptions, etc. if you need to. All right, so let's just go ahead and maybe select a pie chart for now. All right, so after you've done this, you can then go ahead and give it a name and save it. So I could go back here and say copy chart, give it an ID. So I'm just going to call it PMI 001. Customers owing money. So now I can track your customers with open receivables. If I wanted to export this to use in a different environment, if I did my jobs in a development environment, or if you saw a chart that I created and you really liked it, I can simply export my chart and then send it to you. I can also export my chart and write in XML some of the things that I have over here. So if you're XML inclined and you don't want to work in a graphic user interface, then yes, you can export this and work in the XML file as well. I don't see very many people doing that, but that's okay. So now I've said, made this change. When I go back up on my role center, what I'm going to do is simply customize out this outstanding receivables because I know it contains a generic chart. If you want to leave that in place and put in another generic chart, you can remove the other one like a sales performance, and I'll remove all the other ones, and I'll go to this part called chart part. It says blank chart, highlight it, customize this chart part, and now it's going to show me all the ones that I've created. So these are the ones that I have. These are some system created ones. There are a lot of ones that come out of the box of the system. Okay. Now when I close and reopen my page, my new chart's going to be right over here. So with very limited effort, I can create these charts and I'll be able to work with them and get the data that I need. So while they do refresh, they simply do not make It did not give me the ability to click and drill down onto the screen. Now, a couple of things somewhat related to it, not entirely pertaining to our topic, but one, if I'm looking at any of these and if I want to build charts and dashboards in Excel, I can export this list to Microsoft Excel, provided you're using Microsoft Excel that's installed on your version and not O365's Web Excel. O365 installed Excel will work, or 2013 or newer. I think those are all the versions that support it. You can export the data, and then you can also refresh it. In older versions, you can simply export the data, but there is no refresh capability. Here, what I'm able to do is I'll give it a just quick second while it comes up. Notice how it adds a date, a user stamp, and a timestamp. Now, if this list or the filters that drove this list, which are filters on balance greater than $5,000 and location is green, if those combination of filters yielded a different set of results, more or less companies, when I refresh it, this list will automatically refresh. So now I can add more columns on this side. I can add my charts, my graphs, and other things that I might do in Excel. So again, Dynamics NAV will allow you to do some really neat things with Microsoft Office products. Let's leave here and come back. So we're back here. Now we've got a good sense for how these generic charts are created and how we would work with them. Michael, any questions so far about the generic charts?
We have not had any submitted.
Okay, so if you're wondering, boy, we've only covered one item from the objectives and we're already 42 minutes into the hour, and that's fine. That is kind of by design. This is the part that takes the most amount of time to understand, or the time to kind of set up. The other parts are a lot quicker. I might still go over maybe by about 4 or 5 minutes, just looking at what I have left to cover, but for the most part, we're doing okay on time. Let's understand the next topic which I had in my objectives list, which was menu suites and departments in Dynamics NAV. Why is that important? So when I look at Dynamics NAV and I'm trying to find something, I usually go to my department screen and it will show me my sitemap. So if you had a custom report that you created or you commissioned us to create for you, or if you wanted to pull up a list page or something, or some kind of query, whatever the case may be, if you want to find it, you have to have it in the departments menu. So if you have it in the departments menu, then you would have created that to either end up as a list or a task or a report, etc. So the system organizes it. Why is that important? When somebody's navigating the system and they're looking for all sales and marketing reports, if it's a report that you've created, you want it to show up under reports and analysis. That's where people are going to be able to find it. Further, maybe the person doesn't know what they're looking for or where to find it. They might want to just search, right? So if you've used Dynamics NAV search functionality, come up here and you can type in aged accounts receivable. Perfect. Now, the only way it will show up here is if it's included in one of these menus. If you have more navigation menus, it will show if it's in one of these or if it's in a department. It will not show up if it is simply an action item on a ribbon. So if I were to look at something here, and if my HDR report was only mounted in my ribbon on one of these ribbons up here, I would not be able to search for it from here. I would only be able to see it when I'm on that screen and then contextually use it. So it's very important, if you've created something that you want people to be able to find, either from search or from departments, you want to be able to put that in the department menu to begin with. So how do we go about doing it? This is really simple, but it does require access to your Dynamics NAV server. So if you're in Azure, you want to make sure your remote desktop connected to Azure. You want to fire up Microsoft Dynamics NAV development server. So you can go to the development environment. So this will be Dynamics NAV 2016 development environment. Now, click on Menu Suite. A good rule of thumb is before you make any changes, you always want to save anything you're going to change. However, in this particular case, if you've never made any changes to departments, there is nothing to modify. Menu suites are basically a small file in Dynamics NAV that it maintains that records the changes between how the product rolls out and what you want the product to show. So if you've created 2 or 3 department items, that's basically a delta file, if you will. Tomorrow, if you decide you no longer need it, you can remove that delta file and the rest of NAV will work fine. So you'll find there's some things already created when you go to Menu Suite, like Department MBS, Department Region, Department Partner. These are things you don't want to mess with. If you've never worked with the menu suite before, do not change anything that exists. Click on New. You will see an option called Department Company. As an end customer, this is where you should be making your changes. Why? Because if I go and make some changes, my changes will not overwrite yours. If you add a new ISV product down the road and they add some things, those will not be overwritten. Your changes will not be overwritten. If Microsoft adds something again, your changes won't override yours. So by putting it in Department Company, you're putting it in a location that's specifically reserved for you. Now, I don't have anybody in the call as I look through the attendee list who's worked with older versions of NAV, but if you had worked with NAV 2009 Classic or older, you'd probably recognize this menu screen because this is how NAV used to look before we had the role tailor client. What we want to do here is if I've got something that I want to create, if I want to create a new menu and if I want to create a new report, I already have aged accounts receivable someplace, but that's fine. I'll create it again in a new menu. So first what I'm going to do is create another menu group here so that when I go to departments, I'm going to see another menu. So let's go into my development client. I'm going to right click here someplace and say create menu. And we'll call this BMI or Let's Learn webinar. Right? If you do multiple languages, you can create the multi-language caption for each language. And then you'd select a bitmap. Now, there's a bit of a trial and error. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a disconnect too. When you select a bitmap number here, it's one of those icons. The icon that you see is the old school icon that used to be there. Unfortunately, that has very little to do with the new icons, look like. So, yep, not the most intuitive thing, but with icons, I've always found trial and error works. Right now, though, I've already got administration using the same icon, so I know when I go back, it's probably going to show my gears here for the menu suite I've created. All right, going back here, let's create a couple of menu groups here now. So I'm going to create a group, and I'll call this reports. I will now go and if in this group, I'm going to create an item. I want a report to be mapped here, so I'm going to put that in, and I can then select my report number or find by my report name. I happen to know my report ID, so I'm just going to say 10040. You may not, so you may want to go through the list and find it. Again, if you want to call this report something different, I'm just going to call this Let's Learn Receivables. All right, and then if I want to put it in a specific department, that's really important. So Dynamics NAV, remember how when I went back into departments earlier and I said if I want to find sales reports, I click on sales and reports and analysis? This is how the system knows which are reports and which are not. What are lists, what are reports, what are tasks. So it makes sense for me to group this in the appropriate area. I'm going to say this is a report within it. And if I also want to limit who can access it, I can put some permission-based limitations. So I can always maybe rename this, instead of saying reports, I'll call them receivables. There you go. So that's all I've done. I don't want to do any more. I may have added other list pages, etc. So I close that and I hit escape a couple of times until it says, do you want to save the changes to the menu suite? Say yes. Now when you make these changes, you are going to want to exit Dynamics NAV entirely and then come right back in. So I'm going to fire up Dynamics NAV again. Menu, Dynamics NAV 2016. And when it comes back up and I go to departments, on some deployments, while this is happening, I will point out, in some deployments you may not immediately see the effect. And if it is your case, it means you have something in Dynamics NAV called an object change listener. And the object change listener conveys the changes in objects to the Dynamics NAV server. So if that's not working, you may have to restart the NAV service steer and everything will work fine, or just restart the NAV service. Now I've got my Let's Learn webinar and I've got the receivables menu. And when I click on receivables, I'll see in the reports and analysis the Let's Learn receivables report. And I can click and I can run it. Great. Now, the benefit of doing all of this was that when somebody is looking for receivables reports, they might just go over here and type in receivables. they will see all the different reports, including our Let's Learn receivables. If they just typed in, also I don't know if you're familiar with this, when you're searching, you don't have to type in full words. You can type one letter or one leading letter from each word, and I can say Let's LL receivables, and the system understands I am looking for Let's Learn's receivables. Or in this case, it doesn't want to help me do that, so I might just say Let's. So here, again, I found what I'm looking for, and I can find it. All right, so let's move away from menu suites. We've covered that topic. The next progression into what we're doing is understanding the difference between personalizations and customizations. Now, everything that I do when I'm logged into Dynamics NAV, when I am going to my customized menu or customized ribbon, I might take away, say, my vendor purchases list, remove that or rename it, or remove this category altogether. These are personalizations. So when I make this change, it's going to record it. Whenever I log into NAV from a different machine or a different type of client, it's going to remember these changes I've made for myself. These changes can be refreshed or restored, excuse me, at any point in time a variety of ways. If I know specifically what I want to undo, I can surgically come to that area. I know I made some changes to this action ribbon. I can just come here and say restore defaults, and it's going to bring up everything because these were things that were part of the baseline when Dynamics NAV loaded out, so it knows to restore to that default. Another way that I have is by going to what's called a page that's called Delete User Personalizations. Delete User Personalizations will allow me to see all the different personalizations by user ID. So if I'm only looking for mine, or if I'm an administrator only looking for a specific users, I can right-click and say filter to this value, or just use a user ID filter. And once I have this, I can then see all the changes that were made. Now, will it tell me what was changed? Not really. It does have the metadata behind it, but it will not give me that information in a legible, in a human interpretable way. What I can do, however, is when somebody says, I've made changes to my customer list and I'm not happy with what I've done, I can simply come here, select these, and then I can delete them. And just like that, I can undo those personalizations. At a third level, there's also a global or more larger universal type of change that you can make. On that previous page too, you could have selected everything and undone personalizations. There's also another place when you come to this screen here, menu, customize, reset user specified settings. Now, this part is cutting off on my screen because I have desktop scaling. I just have a very high resolution, so to make sure that everything is not very tiny, I scale things up to be larger. That makes most Windows applications, this is not an app-specific issue, it makes most Windows applications misbehave. Here's the reset UI settings, reset automation decisions if I have automation objects, if I have any client files that I use. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're not using it. But you can reset those individually or just reset all, and it will take all of your personalizations and it will flush them down the toilet. Great. Now, what if I want to make changes that universally apply to every user in the system? Can I do that? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because you can make changes that affect everybody in a particular profile. I can make a change that can affect everybody who's logged in as president. I can make changes to everybody who's logged in as order processor or accounting manager, etc. But I don't have one way of making changes that would affect every single profile in the system. So one thing that I want to do before I start showing that part is help you understand a couple of things that you might want to personalize or configure to begin with. You might want to personalize or configure charts or the layouts or what you see on the home screen. You might want to personalize or configure, depending on your requirement, what you see over here in these menus or the navigation menus, right? You can right-click and say Customize Navigation Menu, and you can create new navigation menus and groupings, and then put things within those menus. You might also want to personalize or configure page layouts, whether that be the columns, freeze panes within these columns by right-clicking and saying Choose Columns and setting freeze panes. If you're on data entry screens, you might want to also set up quick entry screen flags that have personalizations or configurations. You might want to change, I'm not sure how familiar everybody on this call is with the ability to, excuse me, with how to work with what are called promoted fields and additional fields, etc. Promoted fields are going to always show when I have, even when I have this fast app collapsed. Standard fields will show up normally. Additional fields will only show up when I click on show more fields. You may have other fields that are just entirely hidden altogether, but these are all types of things that you could do that can be personalized or configured for everybody. Quick entry fields will mean I click enter here, it takes me to the next quick entry field. If I hit enter and the next quick entry field is sell to contact, it will skip everything else and bring me here. Now, one other thing that I might want to do with personalizing and configuring is add things very quickly to ribbons or lists or menus. How do I do that? Let's go back to departments. So if I'm in my main, first if I click departments and it takes me to some obscure screen, just click up in the breadcrumbs to departments. It's because it's taking you back to the last department menu you're on. If I want to add a list of items to my home screen, to my role center, I would go to warehouse, for example, go to lists. Anything that's marked under the list menu, I can right click and say add to navigation pane. This is going to restart my Dynamics NAV client, and my navigation pane is what I see on my left hand side, and it's going to show it here now. My items are now visible. I don't need to search or go to departments. But I can't add everything to a navigation pane. Or maybe I should qualify it. If I'm a developer, I can add anything to a navigation pane, but as most end users, I can't add everything to a navigation pane. That's a more advanced topic. There are things like list items, lists that go up here. But if I was back in departments, and while I was on this warehousing menu, I decided, boy, I really like this inventory picking list report. If I want to right click and add it, I can only add it to the reports on the Role Center ribbon. Okay, so that's important to know. Which means if you're just using basic configuration and personalization techniques, you have some limitations on what you can or cannot do. So when I right click and I do that, it's going to put that on the Role Center ribbon. Now, if I were to go back into departments, and if I were to take something that's a task, I can also go to tasks and right click and put them under actions. So I could say bin contents, add to actions on Role Center ribbon. Again, it would add it to the Role Center ribbon and not to my navigation menu. So these are the things that you can personalize or configure. Now with that knowledge in hand, let's go and do it. Now I am looking at the time and I notice I'm going to be at the top of the hour in a minute. What I think I'm probably going to want 10 more minutes. If you would like to continue on, you're welcome to stay. But if you would like to drop off, we are recording this session. You can come back and watch it again. So let's go back to my home screen here. In Dynamics NAV, by default, when I click my shortcut, it's going to launch Dynamics NAV as whatever my user personalization states it should take me to, or do whatever the default role center or profile is. I can override that by creating some shortcuts for Dynamics NAV. So I already have here in my demonstration environment a series of shortcuts, but I'll show you how you can make one. I'm going to right-click my screen here and say New Shortcut. You will need to know where Dynamics NAV is installed, and this makes more sense to do on the server. If you have an Azure deployment, don't try to do this on your workstation. Do this by logging into the server on my remote desktop. Type the location of the item. Traditionally, Microsoft Dynamics NAV will be installed on C drive under Program Files x86. This is the client shortcut. Microsoft Dynamics NAV 90, and then Role-Tailored Client, and scroll down till you see a shortcut called Microsoft.dynamics.nav.exe. So scroll down, it'll also be the one with the most unique icon, or dynamics.nav.client.exe. So this is the default path. If you do not see this file when you've browsed in, it means you've very likely gone to a folder called C Program Files as opposed to C Program Files x86. The C Program Files will take you to the server components. I'll hit Next. I'll give it a name. I'm going to call this the Accounting Manager shortcut. Now at this point, there is nothing that makes the shortcut unique. It's not like NAV knows to make, excuse me, let me see if I can disable a couple of things to make the shortcut available on this desktop. I have auto sort, I think, auto arranged icons. There you go. Now you can see it here. So at this point, if I were to click and run it, it would just launch Dynamics NAV. There's nothing special about it. It doesn't know to take me to Dynamics NAV in Accounting Manager. So how do I train NAV to do that? Plain and simple. I just need to know my profile ID, and then I need to add one parameter to the path. So I'm going to go back into Dynamics NAV, and as soon as Dynamics NAV launches, I'm going to go to my screen called Profiles. So let's just give it a quick second here while this loads up. So by looking at my profiles list, I see a profile ID called Accounting Manager. I can right-click and copy the cell. The case sensitivity is not important, but I do need to spell it exactly the same and can't have extra spaces or characters. I'll come back here, I'll right-click the shortcut and say Properties. And in the target field, all the way at the end, past the double quotes, I'll add a space, a hyphen, type in the word profile, put in a colon, which is our 2 dots, a double quote, paste, close double quote, apply. Now when I run this shortcut, Dynamics NAV knows that I intend to log in to the Accounting Manager profile. So it'll override my default preference for user personalization, and simply for this session, it will launch the Accounting Manager profile. This is great if you're an administrator and you're trying to help somebody in the Accounting Manager profile who has some issues. Or you want to experience Dynamics NAV as an accounting manager without having to constantly change your personalization to launch into a specific profile or another. Now, if you also want to configure the Accounting Manager role or profile. So what I mean here is you want to make changes that affect the experience for everybody who is an Accounting Manager profile user. You can minimize this. You can simply create another copy of the shortcut. I'm going to say copy here, right? And now I'm going to rename this shortcut to say Accounting Manager Configure. So I know what I'm launching at what time. I right-click the shortcut, Properties, and then I'll append one more parameter at the end after that last double quote, space, hyphen, configure. Apply. Now, when I run my configure, Dynamics NAV will launch and will show me a special indicator on the top right of my Dynamics NAV window. It will say the company name, and it will also say configuration mode. Or if you have something else showing the company indicator field, it will show whatever you like, a database name or some special text that you have. But in addition to that, it's also going to clearly state that you are logged in configuration mode. And that will actually follow throughout every screen while you're in configuration mode. So configuration mode, Cronus USA Incorporated. If I were to open up a intrastat journal field, or screen, it would show me configuration mode. If I were to open up cash receipt journal, it would show me that, etc. Now when I make any changes, the same way I would go about doing personalizations, which could be hiding or customizing my ribbon, right-clicking and customizing my navigation pane, etc. These changes will affect everybody using Accounting Manager the next time they log in. There's also one other thing to understand, and that is the baseline in Dynamics NAV. When you install Dynamics NAV, if there is a profile called Accounting Manager that Microsoft has created, by default, when a user personalizes something and then goes to right-click and they customize a ribbon and they go back and say restore defaults, it will revert everything back to the way Microsoft rolled out the Accounting Manager profile. However, if you have used configuration mode once and you've made some personalizations, those personalizations now become the new baseline. So if a user as an accounting manager makes some more changes and then says restore defaults, it will only roll it back to the way you had configured it. they will not be able to roll it back and undo your changes as an administrator. So non-configuration mode users will only be able to roll it back to configuration mode baseline, and then somebody else launching NAV in configuration mode will be able to roll it all the way back to the original baseline from Microsoft. If you're using versions of NAV that are older than 2013, you will not be able to launch the configuration mode unless you go to the screen called Profiles. It's either on Profiles or it's on the user personalization page, but there is a box that allows you to identify the owner of the profile. I believe it was on the Profiles page. It has been some time since I've seen that field. But you have to make sure that you are identified as the owner of that profile before you can run into configuration mode or run configuration mode. In more recent versions, 2015, 2016, I believe also 2013 R2, there is no such requirement. Anybody who knows how to run it with this parameter in the shortcut will be able to launch it in configuration mode. Pretty plain and simple. So you know how to do everything else if you know how to personalize. So that concludes our configuration part. We're going to come to one of our very last topics, and that is going to be working with role centers and activity queues. So if you are working with this role center that I have over here, which is the President role center, you already know how to personalize it. But what if you want to make some changes that are not easily accomplished by just using the Dynamics NAV user interface and configure? How do you do that? This is when the development client or the development environment becomes handy. Once more, you are going to have to get into the development environment by accessing the remote desktop connection or having access to the NAV server. So if you're in Azure, remote desktop. If you're not in Azure, then log on to the NAV server. The first thing we're going to do here, and this is kind of touching a tip of the iceberg. This entire topic of modifying role centers can be an entire hour and two worth of discussion in its own right. But we'll go to Profiles. And in Profiles here, if I want to modify the President role center, I click on this row and I can see my role center ID. I'm going to have to look for page 9019. Let's come over here. Let's click on page and then click in the ID column somewhere and type in 9019. And the system will help you find what you're looking for. Now, good practice is anytime you're going to make a change, you can click on this row, highlight it, say File, Export, so we can make a backup of the change we're about to make. I'll just call this President Role Center before change. And you are going to want to save this in FOB format. Even if it shows text as the default, with a customer license you will not be able to save this as text. So FOB is the Dynamics NAV Financials object file. Now I can design this, and when I design it, it's going to show me my layout here in a metadata type of file. So now I'm seeing my President's Role Center. So things in the left-hand column, things in the right-hand column. Now, I may have made some personalizations and that won't reflect here, but this is how Microsoft rolled it out of the box. It would show a finance performance chart, a second one, my customers, a Connect Online section. You may or may not see something called Outlook. I'll talk about that as well. And then some of the other charts. I might go, well, all of these aren't showing by default. What gives? Click on some of these, and when you click on properties, you'll see that there may be things that are marked as visible false, which means they don't show up by default. Now, if you're using NAV 2015 or 16, you will not see the Outlook component. So if you want to add it back, and then I'll show you what that would look like, you can click in this one row, you can right-click and say New. You would select a part. Here in the drop-down, in the subtype, you're going to select System. And then you can select from the properties which part you're trying to build up. So click on Properties here, and where it says Page System Part ID, use a drop-down to select Outlook. Now at this point, I can come back here and I can save this. If I wanted to move things up or down, I can also do that, and I can add other components. So just a tip of the iceberg here on how to modify role center pages. This is, again, a larger topic that you may spend much more time on. When I close this, I can save and compile it. Go back over here. It may not show automatically, so I can either click on refresh, or if it still doesn't show, I can just leave that page or come back, or better yet, just go ahead and come to shut down nav and start it over again. Now, a word of caution is that if you had something before, you removed it, and then you added it back in, or you changed the default property, and you're seeing that the Dynamics NAV role center isn't really keeping up with it, it means probably your existing user personalizations are causing a little bit of havoc, in which case it's not a bad idea to just go and either delete the user personalizations for this page or manually add what you're looking to do. So I'm going to say customize this page. I'm going to add my Microsoft Outlook. I'm going to move it left and maybe move it all the way top and take away a few of the, oops, let's bring Outlook here. Now, this connector requires that you have Microsoft Outlook installed. It's not going to show you all of your mail, and please don't laugh at how many unread emails I have. These are mostly spam and things that are not important. But it will show me a mail count. It will show me how many things I have on my calendar. It will also show me some tasks that I might have. If I don't want to show all of those, I can quickly click on Connect, or sorry, Customize, and then I can select which folders from my mail to show, if I want to show my calendar at all or not, etc. And then it would be just good. So now I've said don't show me my calendar, just show me my mail. So I can see this alongside any other type of charts and parts that I've got going on my screen. So you have the ability to use some light Outlook connection. Dynamics NAV also has a more robust Outlook integration capability, synchronizing contacts, synchronizing your meetings, and synchronizing tasks. And if that interests you, please let me know, and we can help organize a session to train you on functionality. And as you're working with role centers, you may also occasionally work with activity queues within role centers. So my president's role center didn't have the blue tiles. Accounting manager does. Activity queues are these blue tiles, or in previous versions of NAV there would be just a stack of paper. If you want to add or remove these while modifying role centers, you can come to Customize, and you can handpick a particular thing to remove or add. And the system would then just follow suit and adhere to whatever changes you've made. So all of these activity queues are gone. Now, if you do want to add more activity queues, again, this could be a larger topic, but at a very high level, I could go and I could work on activity queues pertaining to this and add more activity queues, create some custom ones. And so if you're interested in that and would like greater training, we can set up something around those as well. But at a high level, this is how you would manage your activity queues. If you want to work with enhanced queues, what are those? In NAV 2015 and 2016, I can have colored bars at the top of my activity queues, and they can give some context to the numbers that I have here. So let's go back over here. I think what I'm going to do is actually log into Dynamics NAV as an order processor, because I have some more information or documents there than I have as an accounting manager. Or some of these have now come up with overdue sales documents and purchase invoices. So I think we'll just stay put over here. Now, you can enable your users to make these changes themselves, or create enhanced activity queues themselves, or you can make it an administration task. Simply go to the search menu and you can type in queue. You can also go to administrations and application setup in general, but this is a short way of getting there. At this point in time, I am now able to create a new activity queue if I want to, or enhanced activity queue. So the way I'm going to do this is by telling the system, first of all, if this is for one user or if this is global. So I could select one user, or I can make this global. The next thing, and this requires a little bit of memorization unless you're an expert, is that understanding which queues drive which role centers and profiles. We're working with Accounting Manager, and this would normally run off of what's called a finance queue. So you can just take it for granted. Now that's fine. It doesn't like a couple of things. There's a QID that it's expecting, and we're going to select that now, and it should do away with the error message. So what I'm going to do here is say that I am looking at overdue sales documents. And when the value is less than 2, before I do this, let me go here. When the value is less than 5 and between 2, those are my 2 thresholds, I can then say if it's between 2 and 5, show this in yellow. If it's over 5, show this as unfavorable. And if it's less than 5, then less than 2, excuse me, either don't show any type of colored bar or show this as a favorable bar. Just with that, because I've said this is a global, when I come back, I go to my home screen, my role center. Overdue sales documents will automatically begin showing a colored bar based on my selection of thresholds. So very simple. If you're using NAV 2015 or 16, you now have the ability to give context to what you're doing. So with that, we conclude our presentation. I'm going to quickly bring up a recap of the objectives. We talked about how we created different types of charts in NAV, how to use menu suites and departments in NAV, how to personalize and configure, how to modify role centers, and work with activity queues and enhanced queues. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask now, or you can also send those to aj.ansari@interdyne.bmi.com or marketing@interdyne.bmi.com. I think I see one question. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I see over here is around filters for activity queues, especially if we're looking to create scorecards. So very quickly, I don't think our time will permit us to go in a lot of detail there, but just bring it up. Most of these activity queues that you're seeing are showing document counts. As of NAV 2016, I believe, or maybe even from 2015, we had the ability to show calculated values. So you can create a formula, and then you can show that as a result. Those will not drill down into a list, unlike some of these list menus where I have a filter showing me 9 open documents of some kind. So we'd have to do that in an additional training session. And I think on a related matter, if you also want to set date type filters, show me things that are coming due as of next week or things that are overdue by a week. Those are also things that we would cover in a separate training session. Again, it requires very, very light writing of code, I think 2 lines of code, and working with some more tables. So that's an advanced class. Michael?
Yeah, it looks like that's all the questions that were submitted.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining the session today. Again, here is our contact information, and we look forward to seeing you on another edition of Let's Learn NAV webinars.
Thank you again, guys. Have a great rest of your day.